Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Today, two questions. To bring back manufacturing, could the Trump or the Clinton plan actually work? And in our evidence-based politics segment, has the Supreme Court descended into pure politics, in effect becoming the third highly partisan branch of government up for election in November? But first, place your bets. Yes, time for the horse race. And it's Hillary Clinton with the long lines at the betting windows. The election prediction site PredictWise, which bases its forecast on the wagering of real dollars on the election outcome, currently calculates Hillary's chances at about 3 in 4. That's a healthy lead, but by no means a lock for Hillary Clinton. With almost 20% of voters still undecided or planning on voting for a third-party candidate, many states could still go either way. As the number of undecided voters remains high, so do the margins of error in the polling, making this race still too early to call. Turning to the money race, Clinton is raising more of it and spending it too. In August, Clinton's campaign raised a whopping $143 million for her and for down-ballot Democrats. Donald Trump's campaign has some catching up to do. As of July, Donald raised just $80 million, and he has been reluctant to spend money, reporting just $90 million in total operating expenses for his whole campaign. Clinton has shelled out more than 3 times that, $290 million in operating expenditures for her campaign. And where's that money going? Well, to build out her ground game and for running ads. According to a recent survey conducted by the PBS NewsHour, Clinton and the Democrats have opened up a total 291 offices dotted across 15 battleground states. Trump and the Republicans have just 88 offices opened up in those battleground states and are outnumbered in just about every one. On the ad front, Trump has been particularly thrifty. NBC News reports that so far, Trump and his supporting PACs have spent a mere $19 million compared to Clinton's $112 million on television advertising. One last horse race note. In the red state of Texas this week, the Dallas Morning News endorsed Hillary Clinton, first Democrat to get that yellow rose in 75 years. All right, time to focus on a single important issue: manufacturing. Factory jobs have fallen from a 1979 high of almost 20 million to about half that now. The Trump solution: bring back jobs that have been outsourced.
At the center of my plan is trade enforcement with China. This alone could return millions of jobs into our country.
Clinton has a different approach: grow the manufacturing sector. There's overlapping language with Trump's plan, but Hillary also calls for big spending and innovation.
And we're going to invest $10 billion in what we're calling Make It in America partnerships to support American manufacturing and recommit to scientific research that can create entire new industries.
Now, manufacturing actually grew by 1 million jobs last year, but is a large and lasting comeback possible through changes in public policy. Joining us, Greg David, director of the Business and Economics Reporting Program at the City University of New York's Graduate School of Journalism. He's also a prolific blogger and columnist at Crain's New York Business. And on Skype from Monterrey, Mexico, Harry Moser, founder of the Reshoring Initiative, a trade organization with the goal of bringing back manufacturing from abroad. Welcome to both of you.
Hello, thank you, Brian.
Good to be here.
Harry, are you there in Mexico to bring back manufacturing jobs with your own 2 hands?
I'd say I'm here to bring them back to North America.
To North America, meaning, well, this is what Trump and President of Mexico, Peña Nieto, talked about, at least publicly, that they want to create a strong North American manufacturing bloc. They made it sound like it's the U.S. and Mexico and Canada against the rest of the world, rather than the U.S. versus Mexico, which Trump says all the time on the campaign trail.
I encourage U.S., Canada, and Mexico against China and India to take advantage of each of our strengths and be more competitive that way and bring jobs back for all.
But Greg, does the U.S. not compete with Mexico for manufacturing jobs?
Well, we do compete with Mexico for manufacturing jobs. We all know about the Carrier plant that's moving to Mexico that became such a big to-do earlier in the campaign.
And Trump talks about how he stopped eating Oreos because Nabisco moved a plant to Mexico recently.
That's true, although, you know, people have done a lot of work lately. So 4.5 million manufacturing jobs have been lost since NAFTA was put into place. But all the recent work shows that the losses to Mexico are very minor compared with the losses to China, and that is where the great erosion of American manufacturing jobs happened.
So can you talk about that, Harry, with respect to what kinds of jobs specifically the U.S. and Mexico together are competing for against China?
Clearly, we're competing in automotive. Mexico has gotten a great number of large, heavy investment, large number of jobs, automotive assembly plants that could have gone into the U.S. because the vast majority of their output goes to the U.S. and they conceivably could have gone to China. But they are typically from European and Asian brands that have chosen to put the factories into Mexico.
How much of this is just a matter of wages, in your opinion, that China's going to pay these workers less and they can get away with it, and U.S. workers won't work for that little, and so that's where the manufacturers go?
The major reason companies went to China was the wage rate, unquestionably, pure and simple. Also, to some extent, to participate in the Chinese miracle, to have a factory in China because they want to sell to 1.3 billion people with a rising income.
Greg, what would you add to that?
Well, I think I would add that we need to be realistic about what is going to happen even if we bring manufacturing jobs back. You know, the value of manufacturing output in the U.S. has been growing and continues to grow. We continue to produce more high-valued manufacturing products, but we are doing it with many fewer workers. And when we bring back these plants, and there are some plants opening around the country, they don't have many workers because they're very technologically advanced. Automation, robots, robotics, everything you think about. So we can bring back manufacturing, but that is not going to mean we are going to bring back manufacturing jobs, especially for the millions of generally less educated workers who've lost their jobs as a result of the great global changes we've seen.
Do you disagree with that, Harry?
Yeah. Overall, I disagree. Clearly, reshoring and foreign direct investment, which were essentially the same phenomenon, have brought approximately 250,000 manufacturing jobs to the United States in the last 6 years. That's a fairly good number. And second, our objective is to eliminate the trade deficit. The trade deficit in total is about $500 billion per year. So that represents roughly 4 million manufacturing jobs. So when we eliminate the trade deficit, we will bring back 4 million manufacturing jobs at the current level of U.S. productivity.
We have to understand the downside of doing this. So in other words, who gained the most from this great global change, which resulted in all these Chinese products flooding the United States? Well, consumers in the U.S. gained enormously.
Cheap stuff.
Cheap but good stuff. Not cheaply made, but cheaper stuff.
Sometimes good.
Sometimes good. And the poorer you were, the more helpful it was to you. So when Trump says he's going to raise the tariffs and to raise the costs of goods, there's a clear loser here, and that's low-income Americans. And we have to understand the winners and losers in such a policy.
But, Harry, the context, as Greg was getting at before, is massive employment of massive numbers of relatively low skill or low education Americans at decent wages, which is what we had for a long time in the old manufacturing regime. If those jobs aren't coming back to a large degree because of automation, or maybe you disagree with that, does something replace that American dream, that aspect of the American dream, so that millions and millions and millions of people without advanced technical degrees can earn a decent wage?
Well, again, we'd say that the objective is to eliminate the trade deficit. When we do that, 4 million jobs will come back, and those 4 million jobs will have a range of skills. There'll be some high-skill rocket scientists, and there'll be grunts and people with relatively low-skill jobs, low skills that'll be there. So there's lots of jobs for everybody, but the key, eliminate the trade deficit. If you don't make any progress on the trade deficit, then jobs are not coming back. We've got nothing to talk about.
Greg, do you think the trade deficit matters less than he says? People hear trade deficit, they think bad. I've heard some political economists say trade deficit,
Yeah, that's what Paul Krugman would say, and I would agree with him on that point. Trade deficits reflect the strength of the American economy. They reflect many different global
It means
forces.
we buy more goods from other countries than we sell.
Right. That's what it means. And there are all kinds of different trade deficits if we put in investment dollars and where the money's flowing. And I would suggest there's an alternative way to think about this. So what's happened here is that primarily men, primarily white men who worked in these factories have lost their jobs. Their futures have been greatly diminished, and we can trace all the bad consequences of that. But the women in that same group have mostly started to go to college. Some of them have graduated, and they've moved into the jobs that the new economy creates. The great problem here is that the men who've lost their jobs aren't willing to be retrained, or the young men aren't willing to get through college to be prepared for a decent job in healthcare and a decent job in other industries.
So that creates a political tightrope for the candidates to walk. I mean, Bill Clinton ran in 1992 on "It's the economy, stupid." Is it the economy, stupid, for these candidates as the defining issue this year?
Well, I'd say it is for Trump because he says things are horrible, right? The economy is terrible, and that's why you need to elect me. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, has the tightrope because she says the economy has done well under Obama, just not well enough. And so we have created 2.4 million jobs in the last 12 months. We need 100,000 jobs a month to take care of new entrants in the labor force. So we've created double the number of jobs that we need to absorb new entrants into the labor force. The unemployment rate's 4.9%. Some people say that's full employment. Some people say it's not full employment because so many people have left the workforce. Inflation is incredibly low. Real wages are rising. Not a lot, but they are rising, although they're rising primarily because prices are down. This is not an economy in dire shape. And for some people, like the people Hillary Clinton spent the whole summer with on the Hamptons and in California, life is great because the stock markets and other markets are at record highs.
Greg David, Harry Moser, thank you both very much. Harry, wall or no, bring back those jobs. Thank you very much.
We'll bring them back.
And viewers, stay with us as we bring on some additional evidence. Time for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. This year, some of that flaming rhetoric has involved the Supreme Court. Bernie Sanders proclaimed that he had a litmus test for justices he was hoping to appoint. They'd have to promise to vote to overturn Citizens United. This to help get big money out of politics. Hillary Clinton has even more political prerequisites. Her appointees, she says, will have to view Roe v. Wade as settled law and hold the view that Citizens United needs to be somehow undone and support marriage equality, too. And remember, early on, Donald Trump said the Senate should delay in replacing the late Justice Antonin Scalia. Has the High Court always been so welded to partisan politics? Has it become, in effect, a third partisan branch of government up for election in November, something the judiciary was not meant to be? Joining us, James D. Zirin, a leading litigator, former assistant U.S. attorney, and author of Supremely Partisan: How Raw Politics Tips the Scales in the U.S. Supreme Court. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be here, Brian. Thank you.
Did I accurately, in your view, set out the lay of the land in this election season with more kind of overtly partisan posturing regarding the Supreme Court?
Pretty fair statement. It's interesting that Alexander Hamilton, who has enjoyed a rebirth recently and was one of the drafters of the Constitution, said that the Supreme Court, the judiciary, was the least dangerous branch of government. He thought it was the least dangerous because it has no army and it has no money. But he didn't reckon on something, and that happened some years later, in 1805, when John Marshall said they had the power of judicial review. It's nowhere in the Constitution. John Marshall seized it for the judiciary. And having seized it, their power became quite awesome because they can, of course, declare acts of the president unconstitutional. They can declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. They can declare acts of the state legislatures unconstitutional. So their power is enormous.
You mean the Supreme Court didn't have that power when George Washington was the first president?
Well, it did not, because it had not yet decided Marbury against Madison, where it said it's the province, Marshall said it's the province of the Judicial Department to declare what the law is.
Do you think that both parties are doing this equally, setting up the Supreme Court as additional wings of their partisan agendas?
Yes, well, they've made it into a political football, and the appointment process has clearly become more politicized than it ever was before, since you have a vacancy at the time of the election. And all of the candidates in their acceptance speeches referred to the Supreme Court and to the seat on the Supreme Court, with the Republicans saying they wanted to appoint someone who shared the views of Justice Scalia, and the Democrats, as you said, Hillary Clinton in particular, saying she wanted a justice who would vote to overrule Citizens United, but reaffirm Roe v. Wade. So it becomes a political process, whether you overrule a precedent or you reaffirm a precedent, depending on whether you like the outcome.
And how far would you say this goes back? Certainly we learn in American history that FDR tried to, quote, pack the court so that they wouldn't overturn part of his New Deal agenda.
That's correct. And certainly the court was politicized at that time. That was the so-called Lochner era, which Chief Justice Roberts in his confirmation hearing said he hated. He said he would be an impartial umpire.
What era?
The Lochner era, because of the Lochner case, which came up from New York State, which was a case involving the work conditions of bakers. And it was social legislation. It prescribed the number of hours that bakers were allowed to work. And the Supreme Court struck it down as violating due process and freedom of contract. Now, Roberts would have viewed that as a highly politicized decision, which undermines the independence of the judiciary, which is supposed to be nonpartisan. The result of it was Roosevelt tried to pack the court. It was unsuccessful because the Senate wouldn't go along with him. The court packing bill was dead on arrival. And then one of the justices changed his position. That was called the switch in time that saved 9. And then Roosevelt, a number of justices retired. And by the time he was through, Roosevelt got to appoint 8 new justices to the Supreme Court and to elevate Harlan Fiske Stone to Chief Justice.
So what's changed between now and then?
Well, then we went through a period where it seemed the justices were more nonpartisan. This happened because a number of Republican-appointed justices turned out to be quite liberal. Earl Warren, William Brennan, whom Eisenhower said were his worst appointments to the court because they'd become so liberal.
Earl Warren, the very famously liberal Chief Justice through that whole 1960s and 70s era. And 50s too. Of course, he was appointed by Eisenhower in the 50s. Eisenhower was a Republican president. He appointed Earl Warren.
He appointed Earl Warren, who had been a prosecutor in California involved with the Japanese internment. And so he was thought of as being a very conservative politician. And yet on the court, he was very quick to find new rights in the Constitution that are unenumerated. They don't appear in the Constitution, but the judge finds the rights within the fabric of the Constitution.
And many other justices with him. If I am correct in my memory, Roe versus Wade, so controversial, was 7-2, wasn't it?
7-2, that's right, including Justice Brennan, a Catholic justice, who voted that there was a constitutional right of a woman to have an abortion, at least in the first trimester.
There's the sense that the court should change with the times. At least some judicial philosophers say the court should change with the times. So, for example, Dred Scott at one time upheld slavery. Then that no longer seemed feasible or to make any sense in the context of American society. And then by 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, which a century earlier certainly would have not been decided that way, struck down segregation in public schools. So there is a changing with politics, if you want to call it that, with culture. How would you describe it?
Well, first, Dred Scott didn't make any sense at the time that it was decided. The author of the Dred Scott opinion was Chief Justice Robert Taney, the first Catholic justice to be appointed to the court. A justice who dissented, Benjamin Robbins Curtis, resigned over the Dred Scott case. And it's considered probably the darkest day in the court's history, maybe rivaled only by the Korematsu Japanese internment case. It is true that with time, certain attitudes change, and the Constitution itself speaks in majestic generalities. When it talks about cruel and unusual punishment, for example, does in the Eighth Amendment, does it mean cruel and unusual punishment as of 1781 when someone wrote those words? Or does it mean cruel and unusual today? In 1781, they hanged people for stealing horses. If you kissed your wife on Sunday in Massachusetts, you wound up in the stocks. Almost anyone would say that's cruel and unusual today, but it wasn't then. So do you interpret the Constitution in accordance with its understanding at the time, or does it evolve as time proceeds? Now the justices are haggling over lethal injection, and which didn't exist in 1789, and whether it is cruel, and whether it's unusual, and whether the anesthetic works. And that's what Justice Blackmun called tinkering with the machinery of death.
That resignation from the bench over Dred Scott, has that happened much?
Only one in history.
Just that?
Only one in history, yes.
Resigning in principle because he so objected to the other justices' rulings.
Objected to the notion that African Americans were not citizens, they were regarded as property, and they retained their character as property even when they moved with their owner to a free state.
So what's at stake if the court is now more partisan than it was originally conceived to be? Does it matter all that much?
Yes, it does, because the court still depends on its legitimacy as the least powerful branch of government, on public acceptance of its decisions. And if the court is perceived, polls show that if the court is perceived to be more partisan, there is less public support for its decisions. Its power comes from our acceptance of the rule of law and our acceptance that the court decisions are things that we will abide by.
What do you think of the Merrick Garland situation?
I think that Merrick Garland is a superb judge, highly qualified, professionally seasoned, in every way fit to be a justice of the Supreme Court. It's a sin that the Senate has not confirmed him. It's not confirmed him solely on political grounds. They haven't even held hearings into his qualifications. And I think they've abdicated their constitutional duty. Now, whether he ever gets in, we don't know. It's conceivable he could be confirmed in the lame duck session if Hillary is elected president. It could be confirmed in the lame duck session if it's a Republican Senate. that's elected in November. Thin chance he could be confirmed in the period between January 1 and January 20. But if Hillary gets in, she doesn't have to go with Garland. She can appoint somebody else, as she may well. She could appoint Obama.
Okay. And he's a constitutional lawyer.
He's a constitutional lawyer.
And I heard a Republican Senator, Jeff Flake, say the other day that if Clinton wins the election, the Senate should confirm Merrick Garland because his principle is the most conservative justice you can get, which will then become him.
That's right. That's exactly right. And they've raised the specter as well as of gun rights and the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. And they say, well, if there's a liberal court, they will overturn the Heller case, which said that there was a constitutional right to have a handgun in your home. And however, scholars like Lawrence Tribe at Harvard have said there's no reason to suppose that a liberal court would ever overrule Heller, and we could live very well with the Heller decision.
I gather you're a critic of identity politics, if that's the right term, on the bench, like making sure there are various kinds of diversity.
Yes.
On the Supreme Court, is that a bad thing?
I don't think diversity is a bad thing. I think what's extraordinary is there have been 112 justices of the Supreme Court. 89 of them have been white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males. It's those white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males that gave us Brown v. Board of Education, that gave us Roe v. Wade, with the exception of Justice Brennan, which I mentioned, who was Catholic. And it's extraordinary that prior to Scalia's death, there were 6 Catholics and 3 Jews on the court, and no Protestants at all.
But in America, and we just have 45 seconds, if our lived experiences do tend to break down along basic racial and gender and a few other identity lines, doesn't it make sense to have justices who to some degree represent those lived experiences?
I think it makes sense to have justices of the highest quality. And we had a Catholic seat going back to Roger Taney. We had a Jewish seat going back to Louis D. Brandeis, who suffered tremendous opposition in the Senate before he was confirmed. And we've gotten away from that. Now we have 3 Jews on the court. We have 6 Catholics. We have 1 African American. There may be another one very shortly. And I don't think it's like New York City politics. We have to have a balanced ticket of Lefkowitz, Gilhooly, and Fino.
And 3 of the justices are from New York City, 4 before Scalia died.
That is quite correct. And with every borough represented except Staten Island.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We're here each week at this hour, calling the presidential horse race and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Mere weeks to that concentrated dose of rhetoric, the first debate on September 26th. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.